Hello and welcome to another romantically humorous episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today is a guy whose favorite meal is candy hearts, Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
Love is in the air this month as we prepare to take a look at 4 Rom Com Adjacent films released throughout the decade. Not necessarily your typical romantic comedies, but titles that generously skirt the genre that maybe don't fully commit.
I mean, listeners, I tried to pitch a traditional rom-com episode, but as soon as I was telling Adam, like, what if we did an episode where the two of the movies were like One Fine Day and You've Got Mail, I think he wanted to quit the podcast.
Yeah, I instantly shut that down. Instantly.
I could not convince him, as much as I deeply want to talk about those great films of the American cinematic canon.
Yeah, I was definitely not having that. First up, let's talk about Groundhog Day. This is directed by Harold Ramis and stars Bill Murray and Andie MacDowell. This was released on February 12th, 1993. I have a synopsis here. A weatherman finds himself inexplicably living the same day over and over again.
That's all you need, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one that kind of started it all. Like this is the one that created the time loop genre.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could call it a genre now. I don't know.
Honestly, yeah.
I mean, I guess it's more of a mechanic than a genre, sort of. But I don't know. Storytelling device.
Yeah. I think we often find on the show that weirdly the movies that it's hardest to talk about are the most famous ones, the ones where so much has already been said about it. And this is one where I don't even know where you start to talk about with Groundhog Day, because it is a movie that's cultural impact is so substantial. Like that its mere title is shorthand. It achieves that like ultimate level of fame for a piece of culture where you don't actually have to have seen or experienced it yourself to understand and reference it, or understand the references to it in society. It's just become a term. It's just an idea that is so effortlessly woven itself into the pop culture that when you say something like something is like Groundhog Day, everybody knows immediately what you mean. And it also, as you said, started that. It took that. I mean, as we've talked about many time loop films before, and it was definitely an idea that had gotten a lot of use in fiction, but this becomes the standard to which all time loop narratives will now and forever be based upon.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about several time loop movies on this podcast. This is the third, I believe. We talked about was it 1201? Is that
was, I think, the first movie we ever talked about.
Yeah.
One of the first. I think maybe it was on the first show, but not the first movie.
Yeah, we talked about 1201, which was a made-for-TV movie, and some might argue it is a precursor to Groundhog Day. There's I think it's a little bit up for debate which one came first. And it is based on a book, I believe, that like majorly predates Groundhog Day, but at the same time, I feel like I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like Groundhog Day is still the one. That's the one that started it all.
Mm-hmm.
And we also talked about Christmas Every Day from 1996, which was another made-for-TV movie.
How could we ever forget Christmas Every Day?
I think that remains. I mean, we've talked about a lot of made-for-TV Christmas movies, and I think that remains one of my top ones. Just because it's just so gloriously 90s in every way.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to Groundhog Day, and it's just massive influence. It's funny that when you see Groundhog Day, and you realize that all of the sort of tropes that it created, it handles all of those tropes really well, which is funny to me because like I like to, whenever I watch Groundhog Day, I think about that. Like, yeah, it created these tropes, but it also handles them so well that if this was a movie that came out, later on in the whole time loop uh, genre or whatever you want to call
If
it.
1201 had been the phenomenon that kickstarted the whole thing.
Right. You would be like, man, Groundhog Day just really nails the time loop formula.
Yeah.
Like it's like one of the best ones. Which is it's funny though, because like a lot of these movies, if looking at found footage as a mechanic, for instance, like Blair Witch is the one that sort of spearheaded that and popularized that. But then I think that there were a lot of movies that came out since Blair Witch that iterated upon it and were better, just frankly better than Blair Witch. But with Groundhog Day, it's like I think it still handles everything the best. And even though you have movies that come out that deal with time loops in a new and entertaining way, I think Palm Springs, which is like the most recent one that comes to mind, I think that Palm Springs handles the time loop in a really wonderful way. I love that movie, and every time I think that I'm done with the time loop mechanic, there's a new kind of clever spin on it that comes out. I remember there was one, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a time loop movie where each of the loops got shorter and shorter until the point where the loop was like on like 10 seconds. And it eventually just killed the person, but that was that one wasn't great, but at least they did something interesting with it. Of course, you have Happy Death Day and the sequel to that, which I think brings the time loop into the horror genre, and I think that was a really great movie too. And then you have like other comedies that do it and stuff. I remember there was like a teen sex comedy called Premature that was a time loop movie. That wasn't great, but
I can't imagine it was.
Yeah,
because well, to talk about, as I've discussed many times before in this podcast, and whenever a time loop movie comes up, is that it's not a format that comes very naturally to me in terms of something that I'm willing to give really enjoy, just because there's this idea that so many time loop movies have where you have to spend inordinate amount of time explaining that or having the character realize they're in a time loop, which intrinsically means on the part of the audience that you have to watch a number of scenes happen over and over again, and by virtue of the character trying to understand what's happening, nothing can change about them, and you always have to go through the bit of trying to gradually figure out what you can do, how you can affect the world. And I just don't find it very interesting. But what Groundhog Day does, and what the best time loop movies do, is that it does not... It understands that the premise is very simple on a certain level, as the very short synopsis that you read out shows. The audience can understand what's happening pretty quickly. Even if you've never seen one before, you would get it down pretty quickly. And even if you did want to spend a lot of time on that idea of the actual mechanics of the time loop, it is so much better, and I argue this movie does this, to kind of explore the character in the world, exploring what the character is doing, rather than having things happen to the character and having that take up what could feel like a bulk of the first half of the movie.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that's one thing that at least I often forget about when revisiting Groundhog Day. I've seen this movie countless times, and I always forget like how briskly paced it is. I always think about that aspect of time loop movies where you as the audience end up seeing the same scenes over and over again because it's the same day over and over again, and I kind of forget how with Groundhog Day they sort of keep you on your toes with it. They repeat pretty much everything once, but then after that, they really change up what happens throughout the day. Like as he's progressing, as Bill Murray's character Phil is growing as a character, it becomes more interesting, especially later on in the movie. Like, at one point he just gets sick of living and tries to kill himself like over and over and over again, and then like he tries to help everyone he can, so he goes throughout the town and finds everybody who needs help, and then at every point during the day that they need help, he helps them. So there's that aspect of it too. And I think that that's the most fascinating thing about this movie is like the growth of the character and um just the fact that like when this movie came out, there was nothing like it. Like there was no such thing as a time loop movie when this movie came out. So the level of influence that this movie had on the medium is just insane. It's just so influential.
Yeah,
I also like to think about the fact that he was probably because they never really say explicitly how long he was stuck in the time loop, but you had to imagine it was like years. Like he must have been in that time
decades.
loop. Yeah, he must have been in that time loop for like years and years and years because of all of the various skills and things that he learns and like just the fact that he literally knows every single person in the town and their schedule and he learns how to play piano and how to ice sculpt and
The sheer existential horror, that's the thing that gets to me the most. Is just if I think about a time loop, it sounds like a truly profoundly horrible thing. Just as a hypothetical concept, that you are the only person who is experiencing a semblance of like linear time, or rather recollection of linear time, because you have somehow found yourself in that kind of space where you know that no matter what you do, it cannot affect the outside world according to the rules of movies until you learn a lesson, I suppose.
yeah, there's always some kind of lesson
Yeah.
involved.
Hmm.
Did you see Palm Springs?
I did, and I liked it.
I think that Palm Springs is really the only other time loop movie that I can think of that really fully explores the idea of a perpetual time loop, like one that you seem to be stuck in forever. And
Yes.
what that like the mental toll that could have on someone to know that they're about to live the same day over and over again for eternity.
Hmm.
I think that movie does a good job of exploring that as well.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Either way, Bill Murray, maybe, I don't know if it's my favorite role of his, but it's definitely up there. I think it's certainly one of his best roles. I think that the screenplay is impeccable. I think that this is a screenplay that was probably written for Bill Murray, and I think it really shows it's a very, very smart, very funny screenplay. I think Harold Ramis is a really brilliant director that will be sadly missed. I think Andy McDowell is wonderful in this too. She plays the love interest Rita, who is a producer on Phil's network. And then you have like a lot of really great sort of tertiary characters like Chris Elliott as the cameraman Larry, Stephen Tobolowsky as Ned Ryerson.
Hmm.
Good old classic Ned Ryerson.
It's a great supporting cast.
And then of course we can't forget Michael Shannon as Fred,
Hmm.
a pivotal role
Pivotal.
and one of his very early. Is it his first role? I don't know if it's his first, but it's very.
I think
early.
it's his first or second.
Very early role. Yeah, it's his second. He was in a TV movie called Overexposed in 1992. It's funny that this is the earliest movie that we're going to be talking about this month because to me Groundhog Day is one of these classics, and maybe that's because I'm older and remember it from back in the day, but to me it feels like one of those kind of classic movies that easily stands the test of time, and you can it doesn't feel dated ever to me.
Hmm. Absolutely. A final observation I'll give. I was thinking earlier that you can't escape the time loop usually until you've learned a lesson, but who's determining what the lesson is? What if it's like a bad lesson? What if you're being put in a time loop by like an oil executive and you can't get out of the time? They won't let you resume time until you've, I don't know, become a and also gone down the path of becoming an oil executive.
he can't leave the time loop until he murders everyone in the town.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What if the person putting you in, what if this entity putting you in the time loop is terrible?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
That that could be something for a future iteration of a of a time loop story. I don't know how you do it, but it would be new ground.
I liked the idea of combining Happy Death Day and Freaky, and
Mhm.
that whole like internet, that little Twitter conversation that happened. I would love to see the Freaky Death Day or whatever whatever they want to call it, and
I
have
saw
that.
Freaky a week or two ago. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought Happy Death Day was better, the first Happy Death Day, but I really enjoyed Freaky. I would really love to see some kind of crazy crossover where you got a body swap and a time loop. Oh my god, that would be so incredible. Uh,
Yeah.
but also seeing the lead from Happy Death Day going up against Vince Vaughn's character from Freaky, that would be a great matchup too, I think.
Absolutely.
Man, I like time loop movies. I know that a lot of
Yeah.
them are pretty lame, but
Yeah, I think over the course of this conversation, I realized that you were going to come down on the pro time loop movie side
well,
of
it's
it.
funny. Like it's like one of those things where it's easy for me to be like, oh man, like we've seen it so many times before. But then like when you really break down the time loop movies that exist, uh, I think that most of them are pretty good. At least the ones that I've seen. Maybe with the exception of that Premature movie that I mentioned from
Mhm.
2014. But like you
Mhm.
have, what was the Russian Doll, the series on Netflix, the one with Natasha Lyonne.
I never saw that, but I heard it's really good.
Yeah, I mean that's a time loop. It's a show, but I mean,
Mhm.
really, really good. Uh, and then there's like these sort of kind of time loop adjacent movies that are more like time travel movies, but still kind of play within that realm. Like Time Crimes is one that comes to mind that I think is absolutely incredible.
Mhm.
So yeah, man, time loop. Oh, another one that I can mention that I think is horrible is Coco D Coco Da, which came out I think like last year or something. Awful, awful time loop.
Yeah, if you make a bad time loop movie, it's maybe one of it's a truly terrible thing because watching it, it will feel like it lasts forever.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's Coco D Coco Da is like I think maybe the worst time loop movie that I've seen. It's
Mhm.
so bad.
Hmm.
Um, so in summation, I think that Groundhog Day is an absolute classic. I love it. Any excuse I have to revisit Groundhog Day is one that I will absolutely take. It's a movie that it used to be on TV a whole lot. I don't know if it still is, but it's definitely one of those ones that anytime I was flipping through the channels and it was on, I would just have to finish it. I would have to watch the whole thing because it's just
I
it's incredible. And as someone who grew up in a relatively small town in Pennsylvania, there's like some kind of nostalgia there for me as well. So yeah, I really loved going back and revisiting this.
Yeah, you don't really see it on TV much right now, but I would assume that at some point in the history of it being on television, a basic cable network would have to go for the obvious bit, in the style of the Turner Network showing a Christmas Story over and over again. The obvious extension would be showing Groundhog Day over and over again on Groundhog Day.
Naturally.
So as soon as it ends, it starts again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on and talk about our next film. We're discussing Muriel's Wedding. Now, this is directed by P.J. Hogan. This came out on March 31st, 1995. I have a synopsis here. A young social outcast in Australia steals money from her parents to finance a vacation where she hopes to find happiness and perhaps love. This stars Toni Collette. I never saw this movie before,
I
actually.
hadn't seen it either. I
Yeah,
meant to see it for a very long time, but
this was a first time watch for me. I actually didn't really know anything about this movie going into it except for the cover. Like I remember seeing the cover a million times, but that's like really all I knew about it. I knew that and it was Australian. That's like all I knew going into it.
I knew that for some reason I knew about this movie largely because of the I knew about the ABBA part of it, like that the Tony Collette, that Muriel is very, very favorite band is ABBA, and that plays kind of a part that ABBA songs will weave throughout the movie in and out, either as part of the film or as part of the soundtrack. And of course, if you have any band in a movie that you want their music to go all in on, you have to go with ABBA.
You know, I don't mind.
This is my personal rule.
I don't mind ABBA. I don't have any problems with ABBA at all. And I think that using their music in movies is often very complimentary. Like, I think that a lot of times their music goes very nice in movies, whether it's playing one of their songs in sort of a contradictory way to like juxtapose what's happening on the screen, or in a way that, you know, complements the overall fluffy tone of whatever's happening. And I think that, you know, this, I liked the ABBA stuff in this movie, but I will say that I think that there was way too much of it. Like,
I don't fundamentally understand the argument that there can be too much ABBA.
No, I'm not saying ABBA in general. I'm saying mix up the discography a little bit, you know? Like, it's the same song. It's like the same two songs. They play Mamma Mia, I think, once, and then the rest of the song, the rest of the time, there's
a lot of Dancing Queen. There's about including an orchestral cover of Dancing Queen, which I actually had heard before.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Dancing Queen is the one that they play a lot, like maybe eight times. But like, it's usually just the beginning part of Dancing Queen, so it's like you get the beginning part of Dancing Queen a lot, and then there's like that really great sequence with the karaoke scene with
Waterloo.
Yeah, Waterloo, Toni Collette, and then you have Rachel Griffiths in there doing their wonderful.
Rachel Griffiths great in this too.
Yeah, doing a really wonderful duet.
I want to share another a startling or just unexpected trivia fact that I stumbled across today after watching this movie, which was that it was difficult to obtain the permission to use the all this ABBA music in the movie. And the way that I think PJ Hogan told the story, the director, is that they didn't get the go ahead until about 2 weeks before they started shooting. So their backup plan was that if they couldn't get the ABBA music, Muriel's favorite band was going to be the Village People.
Oh,
which
man.
Fundamentally is a different band with a different kind of it just would fundamentally be not as good a movie.
I agree. I don't think that would have worked nearly as well. I mean, a lot of it kind of hinges on the whole ABBA thing.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to see Toni Collette at a very young age. She was probably in her early 20s.
Early 20s.
Yeah, early 20s in this movie. So that was kind of interesting. I thought that a lot of times the movie felt pretty mean-spirited, like at times. I mean, everybody hated Muriel so much. Like they all hated her. And I was just, I don't know. Maybe it's just not what I was kind of feeling. I was kind of wanting something else, but I just felt so bad for her most of the time throughout this movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I liked it overall. I liked the movie overall. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was mildly funny. I didn't really find much to latch onto as far as the humor.
Yeah, I think it's I would say it is a character piece that is not afraid to be overtly funny at times. It's also not a romantic comedy, and if anything, it kind of critiques some of the underlying philosophy in our standard kind of romantic stories towards the third act. And if you have seen the film, you kind of know what I'm talking about, that it takes this very that it takes a very refreshingly kind of clear-headed approach to what another movie would have kind of just fallen back on.
Well, I think that's kind of the interesting thing about Muriel's Wedding is that it's definitely not afraid to approach more serious topics. I mean, with Rachel Griffiths' character, she gets cancer early on and ends up in a wheelchair, and so there's a lot of strife there, and then like the mom passes away, and the impact that has on the family. And before that, the dad was about to leave them and hook up with this younger woman, and so there's a lot of kind of subjects that are approached in this that don't necessarily get explored with most traditional romantic comedies. And like if you've seen, like, I feel like a lot of Australian comedies of this era have the exact same look, tone, where they're kind of quirky, kind of oddball, had some oddball characters in them. The movie that I'm like thinking about is The Castle, which was from a couple years later. Great movie, by the way. I loved The Castle. And just intentionally ugly. Like, everything about this movie is pretty ugly. From the ridiculous bars that they're in to that Chinese restaurant that they're always in. It's just, everything is so gaudy.
Yes.
Intentionally so. And yeah. I like that, although I would say like the aesthetic is not very pleasing to the eye.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's intentional. It is, especially in those scenes set in her hometown, it is absolutely trying to emphasize just how outrageously depressing and the setting is, and her life there is. But it's just more than that tone piece, and that is what I really kind of connected to with it. Is that scene towards the end that you do have these plot lines, like this perfect out almost to turn this into give this a traditional romantic ending, is that whole subplot. The titular Muriel's wedding is a real wedding, but it's not in a legal sense, but it's not a real wedding in an actual relationship sense. And the movie gets, I think, knowingly very close to almost taking the out after a certain point, and what a weaker movie would just pull into a completely unearned ending. And it gets to that point, and then it purposefully doesn't go for it, because it knows that ending would not feel satisfying at all, because everything that has happened before it has purposely set it up, has informed us that would not, it just functionally wouldn't make sense for the rest of the movie. So when you do get to the actual ending of the movie, it feels, it feels just so spectacularly great. Like that, like the final 45 seconds of this movie are so perfect, not least of which because the single best use of ABBA in the entire movie happens over it. Actually, one of the best uses.
I love the town that they, the town, they made the town to look kind of crappy or whatever, but I would probably consider living in that. It's a really nice little beach community. The name of the town is called Porpoise Spit.
It's a perfect name.
Porpoise Spit.
It is a perfect name.
It was it's not a real town, but it was shot in somewhere around New South Wales, I think I read.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the actual town, but it was. I enjoyed it overall.
Tweed Heads.
Tweed Heads. It. Yeah. I liked that. I like the town. Mm-hmm. So a large portion of it takes place in this little town, and then some of it takes place in Sydney. Muriel actually leaves, and that's part of the plot. She gets a blank check from her parents, and then leaves, and ends up spending all the money, spending like $12,000 or something in Sydney. And I don't know. I don't have much to say about it. I think that I thought it was okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was just a nice, maybe deeper than I expected comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like it's funny, like when we were talking about sort of rom-com adjacent movies when you suggested Muriel's Wedding, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm pretty sure that that's just like a straight up rom com, but no, it's definitely not.
Mm-hmm.
It is most definitely not a romantic comedy. Now, this is, PJ Hogan. He did do some tradition. He did My Best Friend's Wedding, which is, a pretty big romantic comedy, I would say.
Another movie I also tried without any success to have discussed on this podcast.
Shut down. Definitely shut down. He also did Confessions of a Shopaholic, another romantic comedy that I heard is very bad.
I haven't seen it.
No, I did see My Best Friend's Wedding. I don't remember too much about it, but yeah, I did see that. He used to go by Paul Hogan, and then Crocodile Dundee came out, and he was like, "Yep, got change that name."
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any final thoughts on Muriel's Wedding?
No, it's pretty good.
Yeah, very light recommend for me.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, our next movie is written and directed by Amy Heckerling. Came out in July of 1995. I think you all know what it is. Clueless.
Mm-hmm.
I have a synopsis here. Shallow, rich, and socially successful Cher is at the top of her Beverly Hills high school's pecking scale. Seeing herself as a matchmaker, Cher first coaxes two teachers into dating each other. This stars Alicia Silverstone, Stacey Dash, Brittany Murphy, Paul Rudd, Donald Faison. Man, I freaking love this movie.
Like, it's so good.
This is a movie that, I was 11 when this movie came out. And so this was a movie that I was initially interested in as a kid, preteen. It's just, coming back to it after all these years. I can't remember how long it's been since I've seen this movie, and it was just such a joy to come back to this movie. It's funny, like when we were discussing the lineup for this month, I was just like, I wasn't super excited. Like some months I get really jazzed up because it's a movie that I either haven't seen and always wanted to see, or I haven't seen in ages, or it's just like a really great theme to dive into. And with this month, I was just like, oh, like I really know a lot of these movies kind of forwards and backwards, and it might be a good time, but I wasn't just like super amped up. And I quickly discovered that like rewatching Groundhog Day and Clueless and the other movie that we're going to discuss later, it's just I sort of, it made me realize like how much I really love these movies and enjoy revisiting them. And I had a great time revisiting Clueless. I think that it holds up tremendously well, and it is still an absolute blast.
Clueless is a great time. It is, yeah. I watched it. I've seen it a couple times now. Or a few times now. I rewatched it as recently as last year, and I was still very excited to watch it again.
It's one of those movies that the way that it's structured, I think, lends itself to rewatches. It's very easy to rewatch this movie because there's very few like big moments. There's very few lulls. It's just a movie that it's almost like Fast Times at Ridgemount High, or one of these movies that you can just put on and just let it wash over you, and it just kind of flows.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously Fast Times is also directed by Amy Heckerling, so I think that maybe she has something to do with that as well. She also did like Johnny Dangerously, which was a really great gangster spoof movie with Michael Keaton, Joe Piscopo, and she did the Look Who's Talking, which I'm not a fan of those movies, but they were very popular. But then, like in 2000, she did the movie Loser, which was literally one of the only movies in my entire life that I walked out of the theater during. I just couldn't, that might be one that I need to revisit. Just give it another shot. But at the time, I really hated that movie. Anyway, getting back to Clueless, how does it feel? I mean, like, so I was somebody who was growing up during this time when all this was happening. What is it like for you, Ken? Now, you were born 4 years after this movie came out.
Hmm.
So when you watch Clueless, like, how does it feel, like, on a cultural level for you?
I mean, it's a movie that I come to with the full knowledge that it has a certain place in the culture that is arguably only grown in the past several years from when I saw it for the first time. Yeah, it's again, I think this is one of the central themes of our podcast is me coming to works either for the first time or rewatching something that I've only ever known as this thing that has been accepted or looked at in a particular way by the broader culture, whereas you are coming back to it and also have an arc with it that involves seeing it in its initial release when this kind of subsequent narrative for it had not yet been written. And I think to compare those different approaches, I think of Clueless in just a very kind of settled way, almost, where it's that it doesn't mean that I felt pressured to react to it any particular way for the first time I saw it. I liked it the first time I saw it. I've liked it more every subsequent time I've seen it. I think I've seen it 3 times in total, maybe, all the way through. And yeah, but it's also a thing where I come to it as not able to think of it divorced from whatever expectations or whatever ideas that I might have had about it that have been perhaps subconsciously set in me by however it's been canonized, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's essentially one of the defining movies of the decade. I think that when people look back at the 90s, Clueless is one of those sort of touchstones.
This would be a long way for me. That was all very long way for me to basically say I think of Clueless as a very like quintessential 90s movie.
Yeah, and I think it's great on that level. I mean, I remember as a kid really liking this movie. I liked it even back when I was a kid, and I don't think there was ever a time where I felt like I was too good for Clueless. Like, you know, when I got older and got into like cinema, and I ended up sort of disowning a lot of these movies that I really liked as a youth. But I don't think Clueless was ever one of them. I think that I always appreciated the sort of brilliance of Clueless and its script that was like way smarter than you probably think if you haven't seen the movie recently.
Yeah, I mean, if people do try to make themselves think they're too good for Clueless, do remember it is an adaptation of classic literature.
That is true.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
in case anyone thinks they're too good for it, and you're not.
You have Paul Rudd in here it looks like he was in this movie yesterday.
Yes.
He hasn't changed a day since he was in this movie.
That's the meme about Paul Rudd. And, you know, you see people say it and you think, okay, but then you watch a movie that he was in like this from this time and you think, yeah, no, it's 100% true.
It's, I mean, it's kind of bizarre, actually, that this was, Brittany Murphy was really wonderful in this as well.
She's spectacular in it.
Yeah, this was a relatively early role for her. She did a bunch of TV work prior to this, including an episode of Parker Lewis Can't Lose, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best 90s shows. But then she did this, and this was sort of her breakout.
Mm-hmm.
This was sort of her big breakout role. She played Ty, who was the new kid at school, and Alicia Silverstone as Cher. Cher decides to take her under her wing and like turn her into one of the popular girls or whatever. The thing is though, like, you see that sort of plot line a lot in teen comedies, but the way that this movie handles it is it's very subtle, and it's not like so overt, and like the character of Cher is not like an inherently evil person. You know, a lot of these teen movies, you see like the popular girls like challenging themselves to like turn the Uggo into the popular girl or whatever. But that's not really how this movie plays with that idea, and I kind of appreciated that. It's just a really, really good time. Although it does get a little weird. I mean, there is the love connection between Alicia Silverstone and Paul Rudd. They are sort of step siblings, and the romances between the two of them, which is some people could think that that's a little weird. They're like ex step siblings, so it's not that weird. I actually had a friend who ended up dating his stepsister for like a long time too. Or they weren't like officially stepbrother and sister. They were like gonna be like their parents were dating and engaged, I believe, at one point. So it was that was definitely worse than this romance.
Yeah, I would say.
Oh boy. Yeah, what a great movie. What a great experience to go back. I would highly recommend if you haven't seen Clueless in a while, few years, go back and watch Clueless because you will have a blast. All right, our final movie this month is written and directed by Cameron Crowe, Jerry Maguire, which came out on December 13th, 1996. I have a synopsis here. When a sports agent has a moral epiphany and is fired for expressing it, he decides to put his new philosophy to the test as an independent agent with the only athlete who stays with him and his former colleague. This stars Tom Cruise, Cuba Gooding Jr., and Renee Zellweger. Ken, we'll start with you. What were your initial impressions of Jerry Maguire?
So this, I think, is a case study for what we talked about in the last segment. This is a movie. I had actually not seen the movie start to finish until last year. This is my second time watching it. And by the time I had gotten to it, it almost felt like to watch the movie, it's hard to just talk about because we all have these experiences with movies that are just that become so effortlessly worked into popular culture by the time we see them. When we watch them, it feels like, it almost feels like just watching, it doesn't feel like watching a movie for the first time. You've never seen it before, but you've also seen it before. Which is not a terribly original observation, but it's one that I had watching this, because this is a movie that's not particularly thought of as one of the great movies, but it's a movie that the first time I watched it, start to finish, I understood why it is so famous. Because it's just this really robust, solid, like, of its time, a big studio, character-driven movie with really famous people in it. And it just, it just goes, it's a crowd pleaser.
It is 100% a crowd pleaser. This is a movie that won an Oscar, Cuba Gooding Jr. with his famous Oscar speech, and then it was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor for Tom Cruise, Best Screenplay, and editing also. And that was just the Oscars, and then there were a ton of other awards that it was nominated for and won. So this is interesting because I remember I never disliked Jerry Maguire. I remember when it came out, I wasn't particularly interested in it when it came out, and I remember seeing it when it came out on video, and I liked it. And I think I rewatched it maybe once since way back. And so when it came time to rewatch it again for this show, I was just like, all right, I'll give this movie a look. I remember pretty much everything that happens in it, but yeah, I'll give it a look. And I gotta say, I was just really, it just pulled me in. I was just so hooked on every moment of this movie. I just really enjoyed my time with it. And like you said, it's really kind of odd when those really pivotal big moments, the quotable moments come up, the "you complete me" things, because at this point, and shortly after this movie came out, it was lampooned and spoofed so much, and so many people referenced it and poked fun at it, that even these really big moments that happen in this movie are kind of cheapened because of it. It kind of sucks now. because when you see this like really heartfelt moment where you're just like, damn, Tom Cruise is a really good effing actor. It's all cheapened because you're like, oh, he's gonna say it. Here it comes.
Yep.
You complete me. There it is.
He said the thing.
And it's so corny now, but you know, it was a really kind of poignant, powerful moment in this movie. And like this is a movie that even rewatching it this week, there were a couple moments where I started to get a little choked up over it.
It's more than just like you look at it and you wonder if it's just going to feel like waiting between the moments, but it doesn't really. It operates very, I keep coming back to that word. It operates very robustly all throughout. It's just got this nice, even pace and tone to it. It's this kind of movie that it's such a cliche to say when you're, talking about movies in this particular context, but absolutely not a movie that a studio would spend $50 million to make today. Yeah,
absolutely. It's just, and I think it's because like it is a love story, but there's so much else going on. You know, there's his job, there's the relationship that he has with Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character Rod Tidwell, who's like, the football player who he's representing. So there's like that whole aspect of it too, and then you have Rod Tidwell's his story with his family, and you have Regina King in here, who also hasn't aged a day in the last like 20 years. She plays his wife, and she's pregnant, and they're trying to make, get the money that they deserve for his career, and they just keep getting ignored by everyone, and they're just really trying to fight every step of the way, and it's just I think it's a really wonderful movie, and like I feel like I've probably made fun of Jerry Maguire a lot over the years, and it wasn't because it was just a bad movie, is because it ended up being such a popular film that got made fun of a lot. And
what would happen to this movie if they tried to make it today? A studio would not put it into in a time where movies were being put into wide release for large audiences, let's say 2019 even, a studio would not spend $50 million to put this movie into wide release. It might be the kind of thing that becomes like a streaming thing that they like bury deep into the search box, or it would be like a 10 episode miniseries, and it would be far too long and it would completely fall apart.
Yeah, it would be like it'd be like 2015's Aloha, which was also written and directed by Cameron Crowe and stars some pretty big name actors: Bradley Cooper, Rachel McAdams, Emma Stone. But it only cost $35 million, and it was pretty much a bomb when it came out.
This movie, but Jerry Maguire, very successful. I read this online, and I think I read it in a very reliable place, the IMDb trivia section, where everything on it is true. Is that Cameron Crowe, when he wrote this movie, supposedly, and I read this the other day and I didn't understand it. Like the words floated in front of my head and I didn't understand what the version of the movie looked like. That he wanted Tom Hanks to play the Tom Cruise character, which again, we talked about this. We used this term before. It makes, except it was about what if the Village People were the soundtrack to Muriel's wedding. But still, Tom Hanks in this movie makes it a fundamentally different movie. Yeah,
because Tom Hanks is so wholesome.
Yeah.
And I think that there would be this weird disconnect with that, where you'd be like, no, Tom Hanks shouldn't be doing that. Like, no, that's not Tom Hanks,
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm sure.
I think Tom Cruise is the person for this movie. Like,
I don't know. Maybe I'm late to this fact. Maybe every movie podcast or whatever that talks about Jerry Maguire has talked about this, but I don't know. I just learned that yesterday, and I thought, you obviously love Tom Hanks. Everybody loves Tom Hanks, but you can't imagine what that version of the movie looks like. You're right. Cruise is just a perfect fit for this.
What's your take on Cameron Crowe? Are you a fan of Cameron Crowe's work?
I don't have really strong feelings about Cameron Crowe. I don't know his filmography very well.
So this Jerry Maguire came out a few years after his movie Singles, which I actually never saw Singles. So I heard good things. I always heard it was quite good. It's definitely one that we should add to our list. I think that
that is definitely a movie I've been meaning to watch. So
Yeah.
let's put that on let's make a note of that.
I want to do like a Singles reality bites, like some sort of combo in there. I think that would be.
Oh, absolutely.
I think I'd be. Those two would be a good double bill, and then we could probably find a couple other ones that fit that theme as well. Anyway, he did. So after Singles came Jerry Maguire, and then after that he did Almost Famous, which was another like big hit for him. I remember I really loved Almost Famous when I was younger. I suspect that I wouldn't like it as much now if I watched it again.
It's been a while since I've seen that.
And then he did Vanilla Sky, which was if I remember correctly, a pretty big bomb, but it had a really massive budget, $68 million budget on that one. It actually doesn't look like it was a bomb.
It looks like it made money. It might just be one of those things where it looks like where maybe the cultural commentary around it.
I think it was not well regarded critically. I think that the critics sort of ate that one alive. And that's when things just started slipping for him. He did Elizabethtown, which was not. That actually just got a Blu-ray release a couple weeks ago, but I don't think I saw that. But I also don't think it was very good. We Bought a Zoo, which bought a zoo.
Bought a Zoo.
They did that. Actually, I think I saw We Bought a Zoo, and I remember just being like, "Why am I watching this?"
I was about to say, We Bought a Zoo is one of those things where the number of people who've made jokes about the title We Bought a Zoo easily triples the number of people who've probably seen it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't really have much of an opinion on Cameron Crowe, honestly. Like, I feel like maybe his work has dwindled a bit over the years, but I'd really love to Say Anything. I mean, I think Say Anything is probably one of my favorite movies of the 80s. So, yeah. One thing that I totally forgot to mention. Is there anything else you want to talk about with Jerry Maguire?
No, that's about it.
One thing that I wanted to talk about with Clueless that I just like kind of popped into my brain was the soundtrack, and the fact that, I mean, one of the best things about Clueless is you have a classic '90s concert scene performed by the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and the funny thing about that scene to me is like, you hear everybody dancing, and it's really bizarre. It's almost as if the band is just pretending to play and not actually playing, and you just hear everybody's feet shuffling on the floor. Did you notice that? Like, the sound of people dancing is so prominent in that scene. Like, normally in a concert scene, you don't hear the people dancing, but it is like so prevalent in that scene, which is even funnier because there's that one guy in the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones whose job it is to just dance on the stage, and like, so you hear him dancing very prominently. And I just wanted to point that out. Really good soundtrack on Clueless, by the way. You got Radiohead in there, Luscious Jackson, Cracker, Beastie Boys, Coolio, The Muffs, Supergrass, Counting Crows. This is a really great 90s soundtrack in there. And we would, were we to do a soundtrack episode, we would talk about the Clueless soundtrack.
Absolutely. The only thing keeping us from doing a soundtrack episode, or possibly multiple soundtrack episodes, was I don't know if we figured out how you do an episode of a podcast about soundtracks.
No, it's I just don't know how logistically we would do it. I mean, obviously, like the really the best way to do it would be to play like clips of the songs, but I think that we would instantly get flagged for copyright violations if we did such a thing, even if it was for a few seconds, which is a huge bummer. But
yeah. Couple final Jerry Maguire thoughts. apparently you can find online. Cameron Crowe wrote the entirety of the things we think and do not say document that you can find online if you would like. And second, of course, when the scene when Tom Cruise is sitting down to type that out, it's a great 1996 laptop there.
Oh yeah, man, that's a Toshiba satellite right there.
Mm-hmm.
That is a classic Toshiba satellite. Great model. It's a great laptop. My favorite scene in Jerry Maguire still remains the one where he gets fired and he's in the office and he's like, I'm not gonna do what everybody thinks I'm gonna do, and flip out. That's still my favorite scene in that whole movie.
Great scene. Great performance.
What a wonderful movie. All right, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have a moment, please consider dropping us a review on iTunes. That would be very much appreciated. Let us know what your favorite 90s romance movies are by dropping us a line at 90s@filmpulse.net or on Twitter and Facebook at 90spod. For Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson, and this has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.